Yesterday was Monday, so today we're doing a special edition of the radio show with Mark Lee, a show that is usually aired on Monday, but on this particular day, since yesterday was Memorial Day, we're going to do it on a Tuesday. And we'll be back with our regularly scheduled time on Monday at 2 o'clock, as well as our online dinner party on Wednesdays at 4. And of course, there's a number of other great shows that happen here on the Pod TV as well. Hope everybody's having an amazing day. I know that there are some folks excited about the NBA playoffs, and I did watch that game yesterday and saw that the folks over there that were rooting for Boston Celtics to pull off that miracle, it did not happen as Miami did finally close them out after having been up 3-0. So that record of nobody having come back is still been maintained. But now there have been four teams, I think, because I think it was three before that have tried it and have not tried it successfully. So Boston thought they were going to be the first one, but it did not work out, even though they were playing on their home court. So it will be starting on June 1st. It'll be Miami against Denver. That should be a pretty good series as they both have some amazing players, and it should be one that I would think would go 6 or 7 games. But we'll find out through the course of that competition how long it goes and who is crowned the NBA champion. I do know that there is also the Stanley Cup going on as well, and I'm not sure who those final two teams are, but I'm going to see if we finalize that and if we've got a situation. I know Florida is one of them because they swept my Carolina Panthers, and that is a team that I was rooting for, even though I didn't really get into hockey until Carolina got a team in the last couple of decades and all in that space. So I do try to follow them, even though I can actually say I haven't been to a game, even though I do hear from my friends that I need to get to one of those games, and I just haven't gotten to one. Been to some of the Durham Bulls games and definitely been to some college football games and even a college basketball game here or there, but have not been to a hockey game as of yet. Maybe I'll change that in 2024 and all in that space. But we'll see if that is the case or not the case, as it may be. But definitely, I hope everybody's enjoying the weather. We've been dealing with rain off and on for the last couple of days here in Durham, North Carolina. And of course, definitely that makes the trees and the birds and other animals quite happy because that gives them some water that they need and all in that space, and definitely helps the animals get some of that food that they need also. So that is something that is going on here, and we'll see what happens. You do know that here in North Carolina, we get those humid summers and all in that space. And I do know that coming in July, I'll be working the Eno again, and we'll be doing the MCN for that particular event also, because I do quite a bit of MCN here also in this area. And at some point or another, we're going to see if we can get another Road to the Apollo show to go to one of the cities here in Durham, North Carolina, or one of the towns, and have that competition going on also. And ironically, that is an event that is done to raise awareness for veterans and veterans issues. It was started by my friend Captain Newborn, and that is actually his first name. And no, he did not serve in the military. I think he said that neither of his parents served in the military or grandparents. They just like the name Captain. So he is Captain Newborn, but is also very much of a veterans advocate and all in that space. And he's talked about some of the issues that veterans face when they come back home, including some of the things that they are not getting in the terms of care and in the terms of support and all in that space. So I will bring on a veteran who is also a science fiction writer, because I do have a love of science fiction. I saw the Woman King and Black Panther and some of the others that fall somewhat in that science fiction lane, and also remember watching Avatar and a number of other shows as well that definitely let me know that I was a science fiction fan. And of course, I definitely remember growing up watching Star Trek and Star Wars and a number of the other shows, including the ones that dealt with outer planets and things of that nature. And we're going to find out if Chris thinks that we can actually go of that way, and if there's any hope of us actually traveling to the planet, or maybe the planets have already been here and we just haven't been made aware of that. Because I do know that there are some people that have some theories about the origins of the pyramids and the origins of some of these circles that are out there, and how they might have come from other visitors that have already visited here. And I've even got some friends of mine that claim that they might even be tied to some of those otherworldly kind of destinations and all in that space. But we're going to find out from Christopher, since he's written a science fiction book. He's also a military veteran, and I do know that yesterday, as I mentioned, was Memorial Day. So did you do anything exciting for Memorial Day, and did you have a chance to honor any of your fallen brothers and sisters from that any of the activities that you participated in? Because I know you were involved, I think, in one of the Iraq conflicts and a number of the other conflicts. But I just wondered if you had a chance to honor any of your fallen brothers and sisters.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show. Yeah, we did. We didn't go anywhere. We actually hosted some people over for dinner, and we raised a glass and toast to our fallen comrades. Uh, Wide spectrum, how we can lose a person, and we toasted all of them. They all served, they all deserved a good toast. So
Yeah.
we feasted in their honor.
Feasted in their honor. I definitely
Yeah.
understand that and everything. Did you always know that you were going to be going into the military? Was the military part of your family history, or is this something that you decided to go into later on?
Um, Actually, it's a little bit of both. I didn't really know my immediate family. I had two uncles that served in the Marine Corps, one in Korea and one in Vietnam. Uh, I do know of another uncle who served in World War II, but then there's a plethora of other family members that were in the Navy and so forth. But it was for me a deep desire to serve in the military. And for the longest time, I resisted it. I was going to be a pure businessman and go into like banking or something like that. And that door closed, and the military door was wide open. And I was very proud and glad that I stepped into that door.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you really enjoyed about your military experience? I know a lot of people are always glad, and particularly when they hear those recruiting pitches about the travel, but you do sometimes go into some heated conflict and all along those lines. And like I said, I do know that you were over there in the Middle East and everything, but I'm just wondering, what are some of the things that you enjoyed the most about your military experience?
It's really the people that I served with. Places are great and wonderful, but my first time when I was signed to the Marine Corps, I was given a company to lead, and my sailors and my Marines were awesome. It was great working with them, leading them, learning from them. Um, and then at 7th Fleet, when I was out there in 2001 to 2003, the staff and the crew of the ship was awesome. We got along great. We worked together as a team. We had the challenges of 9/11. I was actually out there, and that was a nighttime event for us. Um, and we went right into our mode of getting ready to, as soon as we had target, to go and, you know, meet justice out on people that attacked our nation. But yeah, it's really the people that you meet, you grow close to, or you serve with, and uh, that's what makes the military enjoyable more so than the places. And don't get me wrong, I was in Iraq in 2006 at 7th Fleet, visited Singapore and the Pacific, Hong Kong. I was stationed in Germany. All wonderful, wonderful places. But
Yes.
really, it's the people.
Yeah, I can definitely believe that. I have a cousin that was made it up to lieutenant colonel and now does some military consulting and is part of a company that is doing some work, I think, in technology and maybe even with AI and some of the other things in that kind of space and all along those lines. But I know that one of the things that he taught me some time back was this in nature of, I guess, you are given a certain amount of times that you can make it up to the next rank, because I think he was hoping to make
Right.
it up to either full colonel or maybe even a general. But I think that he had given like the whatever those maximum amount of tries that you were given to the next level, and then he did not make it there. But now he's doing well as a civilian consultant, but I also hear sometimes people that talk about how it's hard to translate the military jobs into civilian work. So I'm just wondering your experience in that situation. And also, I do know that you retired as a Navy commander. So I was just
Right.
wondering, was there efforts to try to get above the Navy commander title and all in that way, or did you run into the similar thing that my cousin Emmett ran into?
It so by law you have so many years to
Right.
make it, and how many years you can serve in the military. I served the full amount of 28 years. I was direct commissioned into the military. Uh, I could go 30 years if I made captain,
Right.
but I failed to select for captain every year that I was up. And you're always up for the next rank when you're an officer.
Right.
So I hit the maximum time. But it's complicated in how you track your record, how you work with your record, because it's really up to the individual to make sure your record is always competitive against somebody else. And you really, if one thing I would mentor a young officer or even a young enlisted member, track your record, know how the system works so you can always progress to the next rank.
Yeah,
So,
that makes a lot of sense. And like I said, that's what I think Emma did. And I want to say he made it somewhere around that, those kind of time frame, because I do know that he had served somewhere around, I want to say somewhere between 25 and 30 years, because he actually got into the military while he was in the ROTC at Duke, which is where he went to college at. And then I think he had a couple of civilian jobs. And then he had definitely done the officer work and had a very long and successful career in the military, because I do know he was there in Iraq and in a number of the other places that we have fought
yeah.
wars at as a member of the leadership. And I think he even served sometime in the Pentagon offices as well. So
Yeah.
definitely he's had that ability and is doing well as on the civilian side. Now, he and his wife, who we actually met while they were in the military, are both military officers, because I want to say that she made it up to lieutenant colonel or somewhere around that ranking as well. She might have been a sergeant. I'm trying to remember what her actual ranking was, but I do know that they met in the service and have maintained a successful blended relationship, because I think she had already been in a past relationship, as had he as well. But they definitely have that blended family and are doing quite well as a blended family. One of the other things I was curious about was that you also talked a little bit in your Goodreads and in some of the other stuff that I'd read about you about your interest in world leaders. And we do know that the world leaders are definitely on the stage now, as we constantly hearing conversations about Zelensky and Putin and even Biden and Trump and a number of others. But I was just wondering, when did you develop this history, this love of the history of world leaders, and who were some of your favorite world leaders and some of the lessons that you have learned from them?
Way back in my public education, maybe seventh, eighth grade, uh, started looking at them. And my favorite of all times is in the West, we call him Alexander the Great.
Mhm.
In Iran, I think they call him Alexander the Cursed
Mhm.
because being that he conquered Persia
Right.
and all that. Uh, no, when I look at Alexander, you see, of course, a man of his time. Uh, he embraced his destiny. He learned the skills. He had great thinking ability, and not just militarily, but he had a political insight to him. And he actually, I read way back when, he was the first man to create insurance,
Mm.
because one of the worst things you can do as an invading army is to destroy your food supply. You
Right.
can't carry enough. So if his troops destroyed farmland, he paid money to the farmers as compensation, which shows you a great strategic thinking pattern. So he's my first and foremost basis. But my ancient or classical period is, of course, Alexander, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra. To me, they're really greats in not only their military prowess, well, Cleopatra made a few mistakes, but their political insights and how to deal with other world leaders. And overall, like Cleopatra is a great example of a person who's on the weekend having to deal with stronger military leaders and political leaders and able to survive and advance her country. Now you jump forward, World War One, World War Two. We had some great leaders. We had some bad ones, but General Pershing, now World War One, had great foresight. He understood that the wars in Europe were not over, and that the U.S. would be engaging again in Europe. And he really looked out across his army field of young officers and started grooming the next generals. Eisenhower is a prime example, as well as General Marshall, who later became Secretary of State. Presidents, yeah, I've looked at, well, to date in the U.S., my favorite president is still George Washington.
Yeah.
But I've learned a healthy respect of President Eisenhower and what he did at the end of World War II, and recognized we entered into the Cold War with the Soviet Union. He started thinking, how do I prepare the United States for this long haul? And, that's the thing about leaders. It's not just the conflict you may be in, but what are you looking at after the conflict? Where do you want your country or your diplomacy, your economics to be at? And that's where I kind of wonder about Russia. I know, obviously, Putin has a desire for more power in Eastern Europe, but I don't think he grasps the economics behind a military action. Right. And that's why Zelensky's been able to hold out, I think, for so long against him, because he recognizes how I have to get external support and monies and equipment in order for him to, well, he's on the defense still, though public in the news, you kind of hear like maybe he's gained some offensive capabilities in order to knock Russia on their heels.
Yep, definitely some of that is going on, possibly, and everything. What are some of the lessons that you wish our modern leaders were learning from some of these historical figures that you mentioned that they may not be learning right now?
Oh, probably one of our best forward thinking, and mind you, I have differences with the Roosevelt. FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. He's in World War II. He's engaging with the Soviet Union, Stalin, and with Churchill. And at that time, China was an ally. They weren't a communist nation at the time. And he was thinking after World War II, what type of world do we want ourselves to live in? And how do I work with these other leaders to create that world? And the great promise of the United Nations was born out of that. And today, I think the UN is an abstract or abject failure of the visions that was set up for the UN. Like the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, the UN was designed to stop such things. And we didn't do it. And like with the COVID response, I don't think they did a good job working with us on making those practical decisions. So I wish they would learn more about the foresights and how to really critically think through the problem sets.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know one of the things that Nick Palveda, who is one of the founders of this network, and Kim Calhoun talk about, who is one of the other founders, is the notion of what is being taught in our education system. And we know there's a lot of folks that don't necessarily know their amendments or know a lot about civics or a number of other things. And as he likes to point out, a lot of people don't know about fiscal literacy and some
Right.
of those things, or even some of the historical contexts of some of our historical military struggles and all along those lines. But I was just wondering your thoughts around education, and do you wish that maybe the military got more positive views within the education, even though I know when I went to school, you were given basically three options. You were going to go back into the workforce, or you're going to go into some form of higher ed, be that college or community college or technical college or something like that. Or your third option was the military. So it was like after graduating from high school, it was either work, college, or some form of higher education, or the military as the third option. But I was just wondering, do you think that that is still the case? And do you think that we do enough of a good job in terms of recruiting people within the military?
Well, our uh, if you look at what the Army had to do
Mm-hmm.
recently, and the fact that all the branches had failed to meet recruiting goals,
Oh, wow.
and they really had to make some changes to become more attractive. And you know, the military has. I'm about the service in the military. You
Mm-hmm.
join for the reason you serve the country, you defend the country, and in particular our Constitution, because our oath is to. And I keep a copy and I periodically look at it. We swear or affirm to support and defend this document, which is the basis. And it is, I mean, you open it and you need to understand when you take that oath what you're fighting for. And I think we don't do a good enough job anymore of teaching that. I wish we did, but the military offers a lot of benefits to the service member. And in peacetime, you really got to take advantage of those. I have a nephew that just joined the Army.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things I keep telling him, you can get an education, you can get a bachelor's degree out of the Army. Go for it. I mean, the taxpayer is now going to support you to get an education. So learn, get those critical skills, advance. You get a benefit while you're serving. So it's. I'm sure recruiters try to advertise that, but I think it's we become more of a generation of me by what John F. Kennedy had when he said, be a generation of what can I do for my country, not what can the country do for us or
Yeah.
you. And I think we've lost a form of service to others. And I think that's our biggest issue with our education as well.
Hmm. Interesting thoughts there and everything. You heard me earlier mention about the gentleman that did the whole conversation around veterans' rights and the use of the Apollo, which is that talent area up there in New York, as kind of the model, and sends the winners up there. But he does talk about veterans issues and veterans advocacy. And I know one of the things he's concerned about is how oftentimes veterans are not receiving the health kind of things that they need when they come back, and sometimes they don't get the support from the community when they come back as well. But I just wondering your take on that, because I've heard that not just from my friend Captain Newborn, but from others that have served as well, that they wish that when veterans were coming back, that they would get more support from the civilian population. And sometimes, whether we're leaving May and this is Mental Health Awareness Month, that they don't always feel that they get enough support in terms of being re-indoctrinated back into society, and all in that space. But I was just wondering your thoughts on that, because I have definitely had some experiences on those lines. I remember working for a friend of the family who had a engineering company, and one of his folks that was high up there was also suffering from some of those post-traumatic kind of symptoms, and would definitely sometimes have flashbacks, and we just had to be aware that when that happened, that is what was happening, and take the kind of actions to not put ourselves in harm's way and all in that space. So I just wanted your thoughts around the way that we treat our veterans when they come back.
Yeah, another very complex issue, and I give credit to President Obama on trying to get Department of Defense and the Veterans Affairs to work better. And he made a statement he had resistance from the VA. When President Trump came into office, he solved part of that problem by getting Congress to reverse a law where he could actually fire people in the VA. Because under previous administrations, the upper levels of the VA were protected from losing their jobs. You couldn't fire them. And that becomes a great motivator for change when you can remove people from office. And with that, when I left the military, I went through transition in 2020 as I retired March of 2021. We actually started different classes per your pay grade, and it was based mainly on your pay grade. But it was also to try and identify people who might have trouble in the civilian world, and more class and skill buildings to try to think like a civilian vice military. And I think it also depends on your job in the military. My type of job was strategic theater level, where I had to interact with civilians more and other agencies. So for me, it's easier to transition out, I think, where if I'm in a pure combative unit, how do I now translate that into civilian life? And how do I make that transition? I think it depends on your community. Where I lived back in the early 2000s, I walked in my uniform into a car dealership. I was having an issue with my car, and I had immediate hostility from a couple of the locals. And it's like, okay, you wouldn't have a community without the military. It's our money that makes you a community. I mean, I thought that. I didn't say it to them.
Right.
Why escalate? It's a little better now. I find that I can go to other places when I was in uniform and not meet that. But I think we don't do enough for our veterans, especially the combat oriented ones, that they don't know yet how to adjust back.
Yeah.
And it's tough to say it's the military's responsibility, but we have to still make improvements in the VA. Now, I'm happy with the VA medical where I'm at. I live in East Tennessee now, and they're great. My issue is more with the DOD and the TRICARE healthcare system here than I do with the VA. But not all VAs are equal. So, yeah, we still have a problem. I think we need to do some structural changes still within the VA and even some parts of the DOD in order to make those transitions better.
Yeah, I can definitely see that and everything, because I know one of the things that some people think about those job transfers is that not every job, while it may seem like it would transfer, they don't always transfer that great. Because I do know that was one of the conversations around even law enforcement, because I do know that there have been some successful veterans that have made the transition from being, say, an MP into law enforcement, or even some other jobs within the military into law enforcement. But then there have been cases where some people have brought that military mindset into the law enforcement, and that can be problematic, to say the least, and everything. So that's one of those jobs that can be a little bit tricky as to whether it's going to be effective or not. But I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, because that is one of the conversations around one of those transferable jobs, is whether it's really transferable from an MP to a regular police officer. Even though I would think like a surgeon to a surgeon would be very translatable, but it's different from doing even that in a war environment versus doing it in the hospital, even though both of them are very intense environments.
Yeah, and having been part of the medical department, a lot of military doctors and nurses do make that transition because their function is still the same. It, and the hierarchical thinking within medicine is a lot of it is the same. But I've also done security and anti-terrorism and force protection, and I've had to interact with local police as the head of security at my command. And I do think a military policeman can make that transition pretty well, because in a lot of ways they're having to follow the same rules, and they go through a lot of similar training. I had one of my security guys, he's trained by the MPs, but he jokingly made a threat of using one of his tools against just one of the members of the unit. And I immediately put him on a patrol outside and took away those tools, because I was not going to have any form of abuse of our authority in the command. But I would think that pure infantrymen, they are going to have more trouble going into law enforcement, because law enforcement, when you pull your weapon, you're still in what we call defensive shooting.
Right.
You're really supposed to have that sight picture. You're only to fire the minimum amount of shots as possible. But in military and combat, we do aggressive shooting. And even when I went through my concealed carry license here in Tennessee, they were going into aggressive shooting, where you're leaning into it. And you may put as many rounds as possible downrange. Now, a sniper is a one-shot, one-kill, but infantry, you're trying to eliminate that threat by any means. So how do you translate that mentality from aggressiveness to defensiveness to protecting? And yet you want those special skills. So when you go into a real hostile shooting, like some we've had, you want to take out the perpetrator that's killing people. And you want to do it quickly, but you're also trying to save as many lives as possible behind that target. Yeah. And then the judgment about when do I pull my weapon, when do I de-escalate, and I found that our training is lacking in the military on de-escalating. Yeah, so I think law enforcement needs to have some form of pathway and assessment to include mental health on people leaving the military to come into law enforcement. It can be a great career and a good path for ex-military, but I don't want some of the mindsets of the military in our law enforcement.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Speaking of the mindsets and everything, it's been interesting watching the last couple of years, or the last several decades, the change in mentality in the sense of inclusion and diversity. Because I definitely know, I remember the whole "don't ask, don't tell" kind of conversation that was going on with those that are part of the LGBTQI community, and I definitely remember that there was a time that there wouldn't be as many women in the leadership, and there are definitely quite a few women in the leadership that are involved in the military. But I was just wondering if you could speak to that as well, because it does seem that the modern day military has become a lot more inclusive and doing that intentionally, and we are seeing the folks of different orientations, different races and ethnicities, and even different both of the genders and all of that space, including some that were maybe even past enemies and everything, because I do know there are some Asian Americans, and of course we had a war against the Japanese that are involved in our military, and there are definitely some from some of the Hispanic communities that we are not at the best of terms with in terms of their country of origin, and definitely the same can be said of some of the Arab countries. But I just wondered if you could talk about the inclusion that you have observed as well.
You know, I we got over a lot of issues back in the 60s and the
Hmm.
70s. I don't think our current philosophy of the military is a non exclusive organization is accurate. Um, One of my fellow officers, his family background was from Iran,
Hmm.
and you can only be an officer in the U.S. military if you're a citizen of the country. Yes, he's proud of his heritage and where he came from, but he was a U.S. military member all the way and for the country, and we had no issues with him or anyone else. What I saw in my 28 years, if anybody wanted to try and be racist or something, the organization stepped on them. Other people stepped on them because you can't have that problem set in the battlefield or on a ship at sea. People get hurt when you do. And what we learned, especially coming out of Vietnam, you're going to generate a brotherhood that doesn't allow for that. So when people from outside the organization saying, "Oh, you're not a inclusive organization," they're actually wrong because we do a lot. Uh, One of my first collateral duties, you get your primary job, then you get little jobs stacked on top of it, was called rights and responsibilities, where we talked about conflict resolution. We talked about organizations and how you have to take, if you have a prejudice or a biasness, push it out. You're part of a group now, you're part of a new family. And it doesn't matter your color or where you came from, you're now part of this family. And we don't tolerate that stuff. I mean, that was in my first year or two serving in the military. Um, Sadly, we do have quotas,
Hmm.
always had quotas about gender and different ethnic groups. But I don't think that should be a primary thinking in the military. You only road combat readiness and effectiveness if that is your primary thinking. Uh, it has to be about unit cohesion. It has to be about how do we use our individual skills in a unit formation? How do we take our training, use it together? And we don't care where you come from. You are now part of the Army or the Navy or Marines. And the Marines do it the best, I think. And the Air Force, we're part of this group now. This is our identity that we've chosen to be a part of. When you think that way and that unit cohesion is your primary, you're going to have a combat ready and a combat effective military. And that will gain respect from around the world. And people will think twice about trying to harm you. And that's my general viewpoint of the issues.
No, I definitely agree with you. Actually, one of the places I work at is a cultural arts center called the Haiti Heritage Center, and it was a thing about a month or two ago. We actually showed as part of one of the film festivals we do a film called The Inspection, and that was actually about a young man who was literally kicked out of his home because he was perceived and definitely lived his life as a gay individual, and his mother thought that that was going to be a way that they were going to, I guess, scare him straight or scare him in to kind of changing his lifestyle and everything. But the movie actually gave a very uh, fair portrayal, I think, of the Marines, and he was a Marine and all in that space. And yes, he did suffer from some torment from some of the military, but it looked like the military, for the most part, was, grooming him to be a good Marine and all in that space, and was not really paying that much attention to his lifestyle choices and all in that space. And I think one of the closing scenes, which is a very touching scene, was the Marines kind of like said that, he's one of our brother. We don't care about any of this other stuff when his mother was, I think, disappointed that he had not been quote unquote scared straight and
Right.
all along those lines. But it's like the core values was that he was going to serve, and I think he did serve for several years, and then made this movie called Inspection. And I'm hoping that I'll get a chance to get Mr. The gentleman that the movie was based on, Mr. Elegance Branton, into one of these shows that we do here and all. But he is a fellow Marine veteran that showed
Mhm.
that film about his own experiences.
Yeah, and when you talk about sexuality in the military, that's to be behind your own closed doors
Right,
in your home. You don't bring it into the unit.
right,
You don't make a big thing about it. And in general, we don't care.
right.
As long as you do it in your own home, whatever,
Yeah,
just as long as it's not a criminal activity or something like that,
right.
it's none of our business.
Yeah,
But if you bring it into the unit, you're going to create problems.
yeah.
And it doesn't matter what it is, uh,
And
anything.
that's across, I think that's across the board. Definitely, because I've even seen that with the way that certain women are treated in the military as well. But I think that for the most part, the military does not tolerate that kind of male macho kind of mentality that can get some of the women officers in trouble and some of the man officers in trouble with the women and even some of the enlisted, because I have seen all of the branches of the military come down kind of hard against people when they have abused their power, and in control. At least that's what I have observed. It doesn't seem like y'all have definitely not come down hard on people if they were using that position to abuse it in that kind of way that we know that certain predatory kind of individuals can do, whether they're in the military or outside of the military.
Yeah. Uh, no, when I was at 7th Fleet, we did have a predator on board one of our ships. And in this case, it was a case of lesbianism.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got the report from the unit saying, oh, it's a training issue, my 3-star admiral got this look like, no. And yeah, we took action. I mean, I didn't. I was just part of the staff, but action was taken to resolve the issue and quickly. Because you can't have that in any unit.
Yeah. I would imagine not. Now, I mean, one of the other things that I mentioned earlier, and I was wondering when you got interested in this aspect of your life as well, was I know growing up that I was a fan of science fiction, read Isaac Asimov, definitely
Yeah.
watched the Star Trek and the Star Wars and all in that space. And you have now written a book sometime back called The SESG Explorer. But I was wondering, were you
Right.
always a science fiction fan? And do you think that there is any possibility of life on those other planets, because that's part of what the book deals with. And I do know that we've got some of these rich folks that are going out into space because they've gotten away from it being a government agency, and now it seems to be a competition between some of our elite like Elon Musk and Rich Branson and some of the others. But I was just wondering your take on the space war and the space race and all of that space, and is there any possibility that we're going to have aliens land on us anytime soon? Even though I've heard some people that have even claimed that they might be part alien themselves. And, I'm not going to argue with them because I'm not going to uh, bother to try to get a DNA sample. And plus, what would you even test against? Because if they want to claim that that is what they are, I have nothing to test it against to prove one way or the other that they are or aren't. But I'm just wondering your thoughts around this notion of settling on Mars and whether there is a life on those other planets and your own love of science fiction.
I probably around the 6th, 7th grade. I mean, 6th grade, I was all about animals, learning about animals and Greek mythology. Uh, but soon after that, I was into science fiction and fantasy, later also known as sword and sorcery.
Mhm.
And I read Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings back then. I mean, we're talking 1970s. And my dad had a collection of science fiction books from the 1950s.
Okay.
And a lot of that bore into my foundation of science fiction, though I can't remember any of the authors. But Robert A. Heinlein
Mhm.
was my premier author for the longest time. And then, of course, Isaac Asimov, the two
Right.
giants of science fiction. And in fact, I got their copies of some of their books there. And of course, Star Trek, uh, William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy,
Mhm.
DeForest Kelly. Uh, and we watched that quite frequently, even now. TNG at first irritated me, but it grew on me. But I couldn't watch any of the other Star Trek ones. And Star Wars, I mean, A New Hope, that was a revolutionary type movie for a
Oh, yeah.
lot of us, you know. Uh, but yeah, that was always there, especially the Highland books. Um, as far as well, sadly today, and I know people already knew this, but I heard this morning where China has now declared they will put a man on the moon by 2030. And you mentioned a space race between the wealthy guys.
Mhm.
Um, that to me was a warning across the bow that China wants to do space race, and they're headed for that. And I really hate the fact that we did not, as a country, keep up our lunar explorations, that we shifted money away from the space program to social programs. And we should have, in my opinion, already had a colony on the moon.
Mm.
There is, in my opinion, so much you can do with the moon. And we started the satellites like the Hubble Space
Right.
Telescope, and I forget the latest one we put up there, which is great for exploration. Uh, but do you want to put an antenna array between us and the moon, or would you rather put it on the moon's surface?
Mhm.
You know, I think we threw away a lot of opportunities already. And China, I don't think is going to look at throwing away an opportunity that if they can get there, they'll put a base there. And I think we as a nation should really look forward to that because, in my mind, with our current technology to get to Mars, you need something on the moon and you need something in orbit. Um, and we have to look at our nuclear treaties because our liquid fuel to travel to Mars and how you have to move around the solar system to get there. I mean, the movie The Martian made some key points about the length of time and how you really have to look at the mathematics of getting to and from Mars and how they pre launch and pre staged items on Mars for people just to go and live for a few months and then return home. Uh, I think we'll get there. It's just how are we going to get there, and how are we going to overcome the politics of using nuclear power to actually do it right? And of course, we put the treaty into place to keep us from putting nuclear missiles in orbit around the Earth to shoot at each other.
Yeah.
That was the point of that treaty, but it also eliminated our ability to be innovative and really taking that um, technology from the 1930s. They started in the 30s, but we used it in the 40s to propel us to Mars and even beyond. I mean, how long did it take Voyager to get through our solar system before it started bumping up against the barrier and trying to punch through that to leave the solar system? I mean,
Yeah. It
it's
did
going
take
to
a
take a
while.
long, yeah, it's going to take us a long time to get anywhere.
And interesting you bring that up because one of the other shows that we have here on the network is Ukraine, Russia, China, which is discusses that conflict and even the China involvement in that conflict as well. But one of the is Sasha Starr's show, but one of his regular panelists is also a former military person, Jonathan Lockwood, and Jonathan Lockwood has written a lot of books around military strategy and military knowledge and all in that space. But he is a proponent of the space fleet and having a space fleet that can help in kind of these military conflicts and can even possibly knock out the nuclear attack that could happen in the way that things are going now. But I was just wondering, Mr. Lorick, your thoughts around a space fleet and if that's something that we should be considering, because I've heard not just Mr. Lockwood, but other ones talk about there actually being a existing space fleet that we should be working on developing in the United States, and I'm sure other parts of the world are looking at developing their version of a space fleet.
Definitely. I mean, like I said, my book, SESG Explorer, I started writing it in 2006 when I was in Iraq. And it's heavy Navy Marine Corps centric at that point in time. As my thinking is, a starship or a spaceship is more like a ship at sea than an airplane. A lot of the same systems have to be in both. And the way a submarine even is underwater, takes in water, disposes of water and waste, a ship's going to have to do something similar to that. And when you fly an airplane only for so long and you land, and all the services are in an airport, that doesn't equate to a ship that you have to maintain at sea for 6 months, and there's more to it behind that. So I always thought a space fleet should be primarily Navy oriented, not Air Force oriented. And I was happy to hear about Space Force when Donald Trump got that done, but I think we went on the cheap. And thinking air, they thought Air Force for space. And we do have Space Command, which is part of the Air Force. So one would think, oh, that's just a natural. Well, that's more satellites and rocketry, but it's not an actual fleet. And fleet tactics and fleet cohesion. How do you use your ships to protect each other? A bomber squadron does that, or used to way back when. Keep it tight, make every gun valuable to keep enemy fighters off of you. But we don't fly that way anymore. Ships, though, work together as a unit. You take a carrier strike group, it has protective ships around that carrier. They have different missions, air defense, torpedo defense, stuff like that. And that's why I think it's more of a Navy problem. And I wish when they did Space Force, they restructured our law, because we're constrained by law about how many military members you can have. So when they create a Space Force, they pull it off of the Air Force.
That makes a lot of sense. You had mentioned earlier about the settlement in Mars, and I know that's featured on in your book, and that definitely something that you have said that you are hoping will transpire and everything. But what would be the, in your mind, the purpose of a Mars mission? So what would be up there in that Mars domain if we were to have a colony up in Mars? Because I know some people talk about how uninhabitable Mars and Venus and a number of the other planets are. And then I was just wondering, would that just be kind of a getaway vacation spot? Would they be doing the research up there? In your mind, what is the notion of what is behind the Mars research space?
It's definitely, well, I do a little bit more in my next book, Minerva. I actually have a training camp on Mars.
Okay.
Because whereas Explorer is US centric, Minerva, the world has changed and everybody wants in now on space. So I have a training camp in Venezuela, and on Mars, I have an outpost for defense of the solar system and a training camp for further exploration, further conflict. Uh, but no, Mars for me, uh, not only do you get there and how you get there, but how do you live in a hostile environment? And can we do it underneath the ocean? Yeah, and we should be doing that. I mean, there's been movies in the past about having some sort of sea base.
Right.
Well, we ought to do that in Mars, but also you're doing research on things you can't do in our atmosphere. You're discovering more about another planet, though we still have a lot to learn about our own planet.
Mhm.
But you're testing out new technologies, new type of suits that you really can't do in our atmosphere. Yes, we have the ocean. Yes, you can vacuum out a room, and you can go up in the air and have zero gravity. But really, the moon, Mars offers you so many other ways of developing new technologies to protect the human and prepare us for the further launching out in the solar system or beyond the solar system.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that, and definitely see how that can be interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about some of the inventions, because we did get that lovely drink from our space travels as well. So
Tang.
if we're gonna make a worse version of Tang by going to Mars, I'll pass. So if we're gonna make a worse version of Tang, I'll pass on that and everything. But some of the other things, because we've definitely had some innovative innovations, including some of the things that are like Velcro and some other things that I think came
Right.
from space exploration that are more useful probably than the Tang was and all in that space. So I definitely hear your
Definitely.
point and all along those lines. Now, you got some folks that are very much into new age technology, whether that's Chat GPT or whether that's augmented reality or a number of other things. And I imagine that one of their arguments would be, why do we need to go to space? We can have our AR version of going to space. So therefore, we don't have to actually go to the physical venue, and we also
Right.
don't have the dangers by going to the physical venue and everything. So I was just wondering what would be your response to them, because I'm sure that there's some people who be like, we don't have to go to Mars. We can just put on different kinds of technology, and we
Right. The
can
visor.
be in Mars without having to physically go to Mars and have the risk of going to Mars.
Yeah, I think that's a good training simulator like we do for pilots.
Uh-huh.
But why give up reality? I mean, I grew up riding a bicycle without a helmet or pads or anything else. And when you crashed, you crashed and you scraped your skin off your bones and you had to heal up. Uh, it hurt, but you learned. uh, and I lived, I survived. No, I think virtual reality has an enjoyment aspect to it. It has a training aspect to it, but it should not be the primary thing in a person's life. We're a living creature. We have our intellect. We have a spirit, and we're out here to experience, learn, and interact with people in our environment. And if all you want to do is just say, I just want to live in my head or interact in such a safe zone of virtual reality, you're going to miss out on a lot of life, I think. And I don't think we will actually understand our solar system or our galaxy or even us as a species if we're not living in the real world, experiencing the real world. And if all you're doing is sitting there enjoying your virtual reality, our planet will take you over eventually. Who's going to keep the power grid going? Robots, okay, they can do that to a degree. Artificial intelligence, I mean, Chat GPT is not there. I just heard yesterday on the morning news a lawyer submitted a brief written by Chat GPT, and it was so full of errors. He had to go and apologize to the judge and say he would redo it. He didn't realize he couldn't do the job. I like artificial intelligence kind of the way Isaac Asimov wrote it, as an aid to mankind. You know, his 3 laws of robotics, it was one of his Space Ranger books on the planet Mercury. The Ranger had to go into the danger zone, the hot zone. The robot stopped and wouldn't take him. But he had to continue that pressing into there till the robot had to come and rescue him. You know, the first law of robotics forced the robot to put itself into danger. But it's a partnership, it's a tool to help us achieve our goals in life, be it food generation, which is definitely important, engineering task, space flight, you know, survival on another planet. We're also a curious creature. That's part of our makeup, is curiosity. You can only go so far in the virtual realm, in my mind. Yes, we had the movie Tron, an entire entity or world unto itself, but he physically entered that world too. You know.
Yeah, he definitely did enter that world. I remember that as a video game as well. What was
Right.
one of your favorite Robert Heinlein movies? I mean, books. Because I definitely had Robert Heinlein in my book collection, maybe, and still have some floating around in this apartment and everything. But I was just wondering, what was one of your favorite ones?
Well, Starship Trooper comes to mind right off the bat, but I can't think of the title. It was definitely a space flight, and a young man got onto a ship. I think he was a stowaway, and he later became an astrogator.
Mm.
And the way now, Heinlein was also a professor of mathematics,
Right.
you know, and Asimov was a professor of biochemistry. So, what made their book so good is that scientific background they had and the mathematics that Heinlein had. And he had a way of writing to make mathematics interesting. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm a business major. I'm not a mathematician or an engineer. But reading through his books about how they really had to go so far down on the small decimal numbers, you know, they went at least 20 decimal points in order to make a jump. And to have that mathematical theory behind his books, that I wish I could remember that title. I don't think I have it in my library. I don't have all the books of Heinlein that I want in my library. But that particular book, and it was a venture. They landed on a planet. One of the crew members, a security officer, actually died on that planet while making sure the ship got off. So, yeah. So it's parts of it that I remember. That was a very good book, and for a teenager trying to figure out what he wants to do, it could help guide somebody into the scientific fields.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
It actually wanted me to be an astronaut, and sadly, I didn't understand the programs because I actually had to wear corrected lenses. And at 16, I came to the realization I needed glasses. And I'm like, well, the only way to be an astronaut is to be a pilot. And pilot have to have 20/20 or better vision. So that's it. So I went to my fallback, the military, and start studying that away. Not understanding, though, there are so many different avenues to become an astronaut and to be part of the space program. I guess, though, my path didn't include that walk. So I was ignorant for a reason.
they're not supposed to be doing it, at least not on this journey around and everything
Right.
in that space and everything along those lines. I had alluded to it earlier, but do you think that there is any possibility that there is life out there in the vast galaxy that we have? And is there any danger that at some point or another, while we're worrying about the Russians and the Chinese and the various other countries, that somebody from beyond Pluto is going to descend on us and disrupt everything? Or is that strictly the world of science fiction? But what is your thoughts about the possibility of life on the outside, and even that life being wanting to take on the humanity?
Well, great thing about science fiction is you look at the communicator on Star Trek, and we have cell phones today.
Right.
So it can be prophetic. Uh, I would definitely like to think there is intelligent life out there. I think with all the planets, there must be microbial life, but is there intelligent life? And if there is, and they come here, I think the worst intelligent to come to us would be a benefacting or a giving life. I think our own dark side of humanity would be, oh, how can I take advantage of these guys?
Mhm.
And in the end, we could actually hurt ourselves and trying to exploit that. I think the next one is that hostile life form.
Mhm.
Uh, I think when you threaten the human species, you're going to get something uh, come out of us that you would not be expecting. Because one, they're here already. So, as in they traveled here, they're technologically superior, but they're not necessarily morally or intellectually superior. And I think they would rise up our creativity, our innovation, and they would lose. I really think we would be unstoppable when you consider how we are so hostile to each other
Right.
and we're creative in that hostility. You come against us and we turn that together as a unifying force. I think the best scenario is just a race exploring.
Mhm.
They have no desire to hurt anyone, they have no desire to give anything. Then our paranoia and our curiosity becomes a mixture. And if we contacted, we could actually find a common ground to work with each other on. I think that would be the best scenario.
Yeah, I can see that as a great scenario. Now, you have some people that will argue that the military, which is part of what you are already involved in, and science fiction are already tied together. Because I've had some friends of mine that talk about the mysterious UFOs that have supposedly been found and are being stored in various military bases or various hideaways with various ties to the military. So, is that something else that is in, well, your thoughts, strictly science fiction, or is there any basis to this notion that there may be some evidence of space travel that is being hidden by government and or military forces, or is that strictly science fiction and fantasy?
Um, wow. So again, it's one of those that I like to think it may have happened and
Mhm.
some of the technologies, but then where's the drive? I mean, the space drive. Because if we got a ship with our intellect and especially the engineers in my mind, the 50s through the 70s, uh, if they had an alien ship, we would have already reverse engineered, I think, a space drive. And why not already have it out there and running? And, we could already put a base on the moon and possibly on Mars. So it kind of looks like either we're purposely not exploiting the tech that fell into our hands, or um, I think it was Eisenhower. It's rumored met with aliens and came up with a treaty which would have prevented that from happening. Um, I don't say it's true or not true because I really don't know. I just heard that it happened. And where's your evidence that it did or didn't, or it's just a story?
Yeah, I mean that would be kind of like the person that I referred to earlier, because I've heard a couple of friends that have told me that they are, you know, partially alien or have alien descent. And since I didn't follow their family tree and I don't know what their mother and or dad might have done in the sense of mixing with the aliens or however that would have worked, then I can't really prove it one way or the other unless I was going to have that base sample. And I don't even know where you would find such a base sample from and everything in order to disprove it. So, like I said, if somebody wants to tell me that, I will just take them at their face value and at their word.
And for me, I kind of like the possibility and the doubt
Right,
because that gives you a story realm
right.
that, yeah, I mean, obviously I want my book to sell and all that. And I'm already working on the draft of the follow-on book. I mean, this is really a trilogy. Uh, yeah, I mean, I want that
Mhm.
story realm to write these stories. Um, you know, the novelization of history is both good and bad, in that you can distort history.
Right.
Uh, but by the same token, you can make history interesting enough for people to go and learn the history. Science fiction, in my mind, is more about innovation and trying to inspire creativity and innovation uh,
Yeah.
to get to that goal. you know,
No, I definitely agree with you on that. I had three questions that I was going to ask you about two historical figures and one that is an imaginary figure. But Chris, if you could go back in time and you could have the opportunity to interview Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, what would be the one or two questions that you would absolutely want to know from them? And then along those same lines, if an alien was to drop down on your house there in Tennessee tomorrow, what is the first question that you're going to ask that alien?
well, the alien would be the easiest. What do you want? Why are you here?
Right.
I mean, um, my background and the way I was raised, I wanted to know your intention of why you're here.
Right.
Then we can figure out the next step. Uh, Asimov would be about the robotics. You know, biochemistry, how do you move to your three laws of robotics and your collection of robot stories and I Robot and then the follow-on book. How why? How did you come up with that? And for Heinlein, uh, I think he wanted to inspire people,
Mhm.
not only to be better in themselves, but to explore uh, social and scientific constructs. And I guess I would want to confirm with him, was that his intent or did I totally miss it? If so, what is the intent?
No, those sound like all great questions to ask and everything. I do have a counter, and I hear where you were going with your alien answer and everything. But if you watch enough science fiction, the usual stereotypical answer that we get from the aliens, at least in somewhere in the course of the story, is that whole trope within the story, or that kind of cliche answer of them asking to be taken us to take them to our leaders. And my first question for them would be, are you sure you want us to do that? Because I'm not even too sure of our leadership as well. So are you really sure that you want to go see the leaders? Because I'm not too sure that they're who you want to be. Maybe I need to take you to the dentist down the road, or take you down to the bump down on the corner, or somebody else that might have a better answer for you than, say, our mayor, governor, or
Right.
president. So that might be my counter answer to that standard trope, because I'm not sure that they really want to go see our leaders.
Well, I'll give you the counter argument. Unless they crash landed, they're not going to just land until they've circled the planet observed and they have made a conscious choice to land in my yard to talk to me. they have done their critical, hopefully their critical analysis to do that. They wouldn't say, "Take me to your leader." But if they crash landed, they're going to be going, "I want help."
Yes, that is true.
Yeah. Now, what type of help is they going to suck my brain, or are they going to want me to help them with their physical body or something?
Well, what kind of help, whether that's the brain or the physical body? There's the whole notion of a lot of folks that even talk today about the zombies, and some zombies that they say are out there just like the aliens. They say that they actually exist and we just don't know that that is what they are as the zombies. So they may be walking among us. But, the other question is, we have whole conversations around energy, whether it's going to be solar, electric, gas, or a number of other things. And I would think that a more advanced society, it may be something as basic as water or something as basic as the grass that's in your lawn. So that might be all they need is a bushel of that grass in order to get that ship going back up to where it is going, because they may have found a way to make it more efficiently than we are doing with either gas or solar, oil, natural gas, or oil, or a number of other things. So they might have found a more efficient means to get around using some very basic things, whether that is water, air, or gas.
That goes back to my question. Why are you here? What do you
Right.
want? Are you going to help us with our food supply, or are you looking to colonize?
Which is a whole other question. Are they looking to
Right.
colonize and make us the next colony of wherever they came from, and maybe they're going to ship us all back up there and all in that space? So it might be a going back and forth kind of thing where we are going up, and who knows how long those
Exactly.
trips would take, and all along those lines. So you bring up some very good points. Now you said we're going to wrap it up very shortly. A very
Mm.
self-confident person and everything. And one of the things that I oftentimes talk about with my various guests is this notion of that imposter syndrome and the inner critic and the outer critic. So I was just wondering, have you dealt with that? Because I'm sure that even as a science fiction writer and in the military, there were times that folks were probably telling you that's never going to work. There's no way you need to write that book because that book is not going to sell. And there were probably times that you had that inner conversation where you're going like, no, I don't want to write this book. No, I don't want to do this military maneuver, even if it was a military maneuver. Like, I think you were involved, if I remember correctly, with some of the efforts to capture one of the most notable terrorists of all times, and all in that space. But that being said, there might have been times that you're going like, no, there's no way he's hiding in that bunker, and all along those lines, when we actually found out that he was in all of that. So I was wondering, how did you address both your inner critic and those outer critics? Because we all face them at one time or another.
Yeah. Even today, I have a inner critic. And when I was finishing up this book, like I said, I basically wrote the draft in 2006. It's not until we moved here and my wife was battling breast cancer, and my time taking care of her, that I actually finished the book. I had the time to do that. And one of the people I was watching on YouTube said, you can edit and edit and edit. You just need to stop. And that's what I did with that. The outer critic, because I deal with the inner critic so much, I can deal with an outer critic so much easier. We were doing a mission. We were in the planning phase, and I wanted to use a C-130 for the mission. And everybody's like, no, you can't. No, you can't. Gunfire. There will be gunfire. You can't do that. And it's like the C-130 can. And that's your best means of getting in and getting out. And the Air Force colonel actually, surprisingly, she's like, never thought of it that way. And I described it to them. It's a tactical airplane. Yeah, it has legs. It can fly around the world with, in-flight refueling and stuff like that. But it's a prop engine. It's not a jet engine. and it can fly at a lower altitude, so it can take bullet holes. And I was proven correctly later on in another mission um, where one of our C-130s did land, and it took bullet holes and it took off and made it back to its primary base. And so when you run into a thinking of I can't, you have to, especially if you know it's the right thing to do, you have to stand up and you need to present arguments. You need to present counter tactics, techniques, and procedures. You may have to argue even on doctrine and why the doctrine is out of date or it's correct. And you just have to be able to stand your ground despite the critics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're wrong, you have to have the wisdom that maybe those critics are correct. And you say, okay, I didn't think about that. You're right. That's not the way to do it. But that's judgment in those cases too.
Yeah. And like you said, sometimes that self critic can be the worst one because sometimes you are so caught up in the negativity of what's going on that you get bogged down in some of that negativity as well. So, what kind of things do you do to try to encourage yourself even when you're going through the most difficult of times? Because I imagine it had to be very difficult to be a caretaker for somebody that was going through breast cancer with your wife and everything. So just wondering, how do you deal with those difficult moments when they present themselves to you unknowingly and all in that space? And I do know that come October, and I do have some friends in that breast cancer space as well, that is a very difficult disease to deal with. And I've definitely even lost a few friends in that, and have a dear friend that has been suffering for multiple years and is still continuing her journey and is in, I want to say, maybe her 6th or 7th year of remission and all in that space. But I was just wondering, how was it to deal with those troubled times? And did you ever have those moments of why me, and some of those like why, asking the Lord, why us, and all of that kind of space?
Exactly. Multiple times, I would say, even when I thought I was on good ground, why me? But really, I turned to my faith. Uh, I do pray to Jesus. I do read my Bible, and I remind myself mentally, especially when depression wants to hit, uh, who I am, and that depression is not a part of me. It can't be a part of me. Uh, that I have a inner strength from my Lord, and I'm able to push through because He gives me that ability. Uh, he gave me creativity. He gave me imagination. He gives me His strength, especially when I need it the most. He's there the mostest. So, yeah, that year when she was going through the chemo and all that, I I I still wake up at 4:30 in the morning. I kept that habit. I mean, I grow my hair long and all that, but I still keep that habit. And I would let the dogs out, bring them back in, just come right into my prayer room for her primarily, and for me to. And I'm not a caregiver by nature. I'm really not. So she got stuck with among the worst caregivers possible. So I had to pray for myself to be a caregiver to her. Uh, and she had it rough, but she's a survivor. Her attitude through it all was great. And I just wanted to make sure I had the right thinking pattern and the right uh, servitude, heart, or to take care of her during those times and not complain about, anything. She didn't need that. She needed strength and compassion and caring. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
I didn't want to rebuke myself, so I got further into prayer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is she still with us and everything?
Yeah, she is. She's actually doing a bank inspection right now. So,
She's
uh,
doing a what kind of inspection?
bank. She works for FDIC, So she's inspecting one of the banks in East Tennessee.
Going in there, making sure that the bankers are actually following all the rules and the regulations and all of that. And we know
Right.
she might have even shut down one or two of those bad banks because I do know the FDIC, if you don't do right, they will come down there and shut you down. But you've got to do some serious bad acting in order to get
Right.
it shut down. But they have shut down at least a few here and there, either for not following the rules or not keeping up to the standards and everything. So that can be a difficult job. I had a friend of mine that had something similar. It wasn't with banking, but she was actually a relatively small lady and everything. But we went to a journalism camp together in the
Hmm.
late 70s, and then she went off and became a what do you call it? The people that go and a repossession person. So she
Oh,
literally
yeah.
would go and repossess cars and things like that. And I just remember thinking to myself, because I remember when she was in the journalism camp that she could have been more than 5'4" or 5'5", and I'm going like, I don't know how you go in there because I think she was joining in Tennessee. Come and think of Tennessee. I think she was in the Tennessee area. I don't think she was in South Carolina. And I'm going like, I don't know how you're going to run into some of these hills that can be in Tennessee and get this car. I'm hoping you're taking a entire force with you because I'm just visualizing you going in, even with the biggest gun, and there's still going to be some pushbacks in some of those backcountry aspects of Tennessee
Oh,
and all
yeah.
along those lines. So, like I said, I don't think she's still in that field. She might have gone into something else by now. She might have even gone into nursing now that I think about it. But I just remember going and thinking, interesting career choice. But yeah,
Yeah, I never wanted to do that job.
no, that was not on my wish list of jobs. There were some jobs that I did not have on my wish list. That was definitely one that I would not be trying to rush into with any sort of vigor whatsoever and all along those lines. One of the things I get everybody to do, and I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope you'll come back on this show as well as on our new show and some of the other shows that we have as well. But if you want to share a little bit more, and we did allude to it a couple of times during the conversation about your book and the one is out and the one that is coming out, and where folks can find said book if they want to get their copy. And one of the things that I try to do, and I've kind of alluded to it a couple of times on this show, is I'm always about positivity and positive messages and messages of hope and inspiration, because I think we need that during this time, particularly after what we went through with the pandemic and everything. So any message of positivity and hope that you can give for our global community, because the shows are heard not just here, but throughout the world. I'm sure that our listeners would love to hear that message. So as we wrap up, if you've got a message of positivity and hope, and also ways that folks can reach you, and I do extend an invitation for you to come back whenever you are able to.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'd be glad to come back. And I do have a Facebook, Christopher Lork. That's Please follow me on that. The book is through Dorrance Publishing. You can get it there. That's DORRANCE Publishing. Don't think you can see that
Oh
there.
yes, I got
Okay.
it. Yeah.
You can also get it online at Barnes and Nobles or Amazon, Walmart, Books a Million, any online store is available, or directly from DorrancePublishing.com. Uh,
Are you on, before you get the message of positivity, are you on LinkedIn? Because I do know we sometimes do LinkedIn and Alignable as well. So are you on those two social media outlets? And has social media been helping you get your publications out? And then I definitely still want to hear that message of positivity.
no, I've only recently come back on to Facebook. I've avoided social media for years. When I was stationed in Korea, that was, I think I ended it though when I transferred to Omaha to US Stratcom. Um, I just, the privacy rules that Facebook had at the time was not really for me. I'm a big Fourth Amendment proponent and stuff like that. But I'm starting social media again because I finally have published the book, and I want to be able to get the word out that, hey, I'm out here. I have a product that I hope you would enjoy. And yeah, and when I publish Minerva, uh, I'll have it on my website or on the Facebook as well. Positively and hope. I look at, man, we have a lot of problems, but when we use our intellect, when we control our emotions, when we use our creativity in a servant type way, we'll help each other. We can pull through anything. We can achieve great goals. We think we have some issues with climate. Well, with critical thinking and creativity, we can overcome any of that. We can get past our selfishness. We can actually stop conflict and look at how we can help each other stand up and walk forward. Sadly, we need each other, so we need to need each other and work together, and we can do it. We have the capacity. We just need to get our minds into that thinking of, it's not about me, it's about us, it's about you. And when we do that, we can overcome anything.
Yep. No, I definitely agree with you on that. And speaking of social media, and Kim, the other founder, would probably be upset if I didn't mention this, but there are other folks that have been upset at Facebook as well. So we're actually in the process of starting our own kind of Facebook type page called Chatter. So POTV Chatter will be launching in a month or two, and everything will be tied to the network. So there'll be another outlet for people to have conversations, and it will be less of that kind of conflict conversation, because that's part of the reason of them creating it, because they were frustrated by some of those crazy rules, as well as some of the other things that were going on. So Kim, having that engineering background, was like, hey, just like we're building our own network, let's build our own web social media presence as well. So she's been very busy with that. And right now we're in the beta stages, but hopefully in the summer or fall, it will actually be launched, and it'll be an alternative to either Facebook or Rumble. And it'll be another place that folks can go and have conversation both about the shows as well as just life in general. So like I said, we're in those beta testing stages right now. So like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Hope to have you back on nearby future. And all in that way, I'm going to go out with a couple of PSAs, including one about adopting dogs, because it's about fostering dogs and all along those lines. Don't have any pets at the moment. Just recently got a plant. That's what I was looking over to the side to make sure that the plant is still there in the windowsill. And at some point or another, I'll get another pet of some sort, because I've had a variety of them, ranging from dogs and cats to geckos even, and other animals. I think there were some rabbits and maybe even a raccoon or two in as a youngster and everything, and a goat. But I don't have any pets at the moment. Maybe Mr. Doric has some pets, and with he and his wife, or maybe they're like, no, we were too busy traveling. We got no time for no pets.
No, I have two Akitas and a Shiba Inu. They're a handful, but
oh yes,
they're great.
They could definitely be a handful. Like I said, I don't have any, but I was traveling recently with my brother to visit my mom, and he was bringing the grandparent niece with him. And if you know anything about that dog, which is a big, hairy, very sheep-like dog, it can be a handful as well. So yeah, those animals can be a handful, whether they're the small dogs or the the big dogs, or even the small or big cats. But any animal can be a handful. A friend of mine even has a hard time with his fish sometimes, even though they just basically ignore him like all good fish will anyway, until it's time for him to feed them. But on that note, we're going to go out with this particular PSA about the pet adoption and a couple of other PSAs, and then we'll get on out of here. But it's a great conversation, and look forward to having you back very shortly.
Thank you. I was very happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to the next time. Have a great one.
You do safe.
So much.
Fostering a pet for a friend or neighbor can keep families together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
Why would drug dealers put a lethal dose of fentanyl in drugs if they know it's so harmful?
It's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable. Really just all about the money.
Recognize the excuses are not valid. They're conjured up, they're fabricated, they're lies. And how do you stop the lies? You stop the lies with the truth. The truth is, you have time. You have the skill, you have the knowledge and the support and the willpower and the discipline to get it done.
The fruit of everything good in life begins with a challenge. Everything is uphill this required. And it's not going to come to you, and it's not going to fall in your lap, and it's not going to be something that, oh my God, it just was so simple. It's always going to be difficult.
If you want it, you gotta go get it.
This is your chance. This is your shot. This is your moment. This is your time. This is your place. This is your opportunity.
This is my time. This is my moment. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. Ain't no such thing as tomorrow. We only got today. It's your dream. If you want to have it, get your butt up and make it happen. If you want to have it, rise and grind. You still got work to do. Stay on that basketball court. Stay on that football field. It's grind season, homie.
This is your time to get what you want. Go work that thing with Work That Thing supplements.